why I do the podcast, because she was thinking I should align it more with my business goals. I'm gonna get back to the intro in a second. And I was like, because I don't really have the opportunity to be like say the things I want to say outside of in like really business formal calls sometimes. So I wanted to bring on a bevy of people that are from all over the place, that have different values, that might be entrepreneurs, but don't just talk about business all the time. So that's the point of the show, and I'm glad you're here today. So I have a fascinating guest lined up for you. He calls himself Self-Worth Sam, and you'd be hard pressed to find his name anywhere on his literature. And I have his book here in front of me, and so we're going to call him Self-Worth Sam, or Sam the Man. He's the author of the best-selling book How to Beat Imposter Syndrome and Be Confident. And I feel like at least once a week I have a conversation with somebody in my line of business, which I run a branding agency, marketing, branding, content creation, and we teach people how to have impactful presences and tell their stories. And so there's not a week that goes by that I don't have a conversation with somebody around imposter syndrome and their perceived inability to step into a position of authority on a topic of their choosing, or something in line with their business or whatever they're trying to sell. And they're always like, well, like, why would anyone listen to me? And I'm like, well, why wouldn't they want to listen to you? Like, how can we reposition that and reframe that? So Sam is the author of the best-selling book How to Beat Imposter Syndrome, and he's going to see if my advice to these people is right, which it is. And in this really unique episode today, we're going to sort of explore the intricacies of what imposter syndrome is, how does one acquire it, how does one overcome it, and in the process discuss Sam's own journey and how he's overcome it and how he's gone on to become an international best-selling author. That's a pretty cool deal to have as your credentials, best-selling author. I've never written a book, so I kind of like to figure that out as well. He's a really cool dude. I've met him a couple of times over previous phone calls in preparation for the podcast, and he's very, very lighthearted, does not take himself very seriously. And when we agreed to do the podcast, I was really excited about it because I think it'll be a fun conversation. He has some interesting takeaways on this topic, so I'm going to challenge a couple of those. Big surprise. And anyway, so before I jump into that and I bring him on the show, I sort of dealt with imposter syndrome as well. Like, I think a lot of people are surprised when they get to know me really well that I'm actually more introverted than I am extroverted. I like being around people. I love connecting and doing all the things, but all the things make me like I have to recharge and reboot. So I really value that downtime. And I want to talk a little bit about on the show with Sam when he comes on, that how valuable that downtime is for people like me. But anyhow, my story with imposter syndrome is several, actually. So a lot of people think that I'm introverted, as I was saying, and then they're really surprised to learn that I actually get sort of nervous sometimes being on camera, and even before every podcast, I have to prepare for it because I need to understand what I'm going to talk about. But I still get like, when athletes call them butterflies, I still get butterflies in my stomach because they're like, because I need to show up, and I sometimes wonder, like, why do people listen to my show? And I used to think that about 3 years ago, when I first launched the podcast, I was like, why would anybody want to listen to what I have to say? Like, there's so many people out there doing so many greater things than me. Why would anyone log in and listen to my podcast and devote 60 minutes of their time to a show that seemingly doesn't talk about anything in particular, but everything all at once? So I didn't do it for a while. I held back and I had all these really cool ideas. But one morning, I was like, what the fuck? Like, why would I not start this podcast? And so I just started doing it. And now, 3 years later, I've recorded my 180th episode. Got some pretty cool sponsorships that are lining up. I'm really excited about that. I always said that I wasn't going to do sponsorships unless it was a product that I already use and love, or it's a product that after trying it, I would really truly use it without being paid to use it. So those are happening. I'm really excited about that. And I just found out that my show is in the top 10% of podcasts where subscribers actually listen to the full episode start to finish. So yeah, thank you. My small but mighty tribe is growing, and I really appreciate that. So I embraced my imposter syndrome and was like, why not? And 3 years later, through this podcast, I have embraced and connected with, man, so many cool people, literally so many cool people. My entire mastermind group is built from the podcast. And we just came back from Mexico, which you've heard me talk about a few times. I dropped that because I just like to talk about it. But I was in Mexico with my mastermind group, all of which we met on the podcast, and we met for the first time and had our annual retreat in Mexico. And all of that happened because I was like, okay, why not me? Instead of asking why me. So I'm living proof, as is Sam, who's about to join the show, and thousands and millions of other people who are stepping into their power and doing the things that they've always wanted to do, but were held back for one reason or another because they had this scarcity or this idea that they just weren't good enough, whatever. So, Sam, welcome to the show, brother.
Devo, g'day from down under. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Oh, I forgot to say you're joining us from Australia, where it's like 5 something in the morning right now, right?
It is 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning.
Dude,
I'm in Melbourne, Australia.
Dude, mad props for even getting up this early to do this. I really appreciate it. I know we had some difficulties scheduling it because of the schedules and the time zone, but I'm glad we finally pulled it together.
Me too, brother. How you doing today?
Oh man, I've never done this late in the day podcast, so I was wondering if I was going to be sharp enough for you intellectually. So talk slow, don't use big words. It's late in the day, you're early.
I'll switch from the Australian accent to a more universal, maybe Californian accent if you want.
Can you do that?
Well, I lived in California for about 5 years in Burbank, so yeah, I can do it.
Wait, do your California?
I probably just absolutely butchered it, but
you did sound a little bit between a redneck and a Southern boy, but
I'm not going to do it anymore. Okay. That was horrible.
I always wonder when I watch movies, actors who are not native speaking, how they must have to practice for hours to get that inflection down.
Well, I know that when Americans try to play Australians in movies, they absolutely destroy the accent, and it's cringeworthy. It's like, stop. A few can do it, but not many. But I think Australians can do American accents because we grew up on Sesame Street. Everyone in Australia grew up on that program. I'm sure of it.
I used to love Sesame Street as a kid, and then they've sort of kind of gone whack jobs in the last 10 years. But I used to really love Sesame Street.
I'm talking the 80s.
Yeah, I'm talking the 80s too. I don't think we're that far off age-wise.
1979.
Okay, so we're roughly the same age.
Cool.
And that's a shout out to my friend Courtney, who was doubting my age the other day. So I just went live and gave you my age, Courtney. So anyhow, we're going to talk about imposter syndrome today. So I wanted to start off this podcast around, by the way, can I just stop for a second? Sorry. Dude, I've never met an Australian that I didn't get along with.
That's cool.
For real.
I think Australians have got a bit of a reputation of being pretty friendly. We've also got a reputation of making fun of people as a test to see if they're cool. And we will make fun of them, but we secretly want you to basically hit the ball back and try to insult us even more. And then we know that you can take yourself lightly.
Yeah.
If we make a little joke about you, we actually want you to make a joke back and to see how quickly you can be at, with your wit. So
at some point during this podcast, are you going to offend me?
I will try it every moment possible. Starting with your bald hair.
Oh, dude, I'm going no hat zone today. How you like that?
I love it. But you've compensated.
No, I just shaved it all off. I'm totally cool with it. I'd have no problem with it. It's so much easier. And because my hair grows
you're looking sexy.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And because my hair grows in a weird way, if I let it actually grow out, it gets really big in other spots, like a chia pet. Remember the old school chia pets? Dude, I'm just like But then
What are
there's
you
this
waiting for, man? That's
no,
like
but
a whole new, that's a niche market. That's a gap market just waiting to happen.
no, because there's one part of my head that doesn't grow, so I have like a reverse rhinoceros horn going on. So I don't play with that game. I don't play with the cheetah pet no more.
Troll doll.
That's right. All right, so let's get into this. Imposter syndrome. And I sort of gave I don't know if you heard in the outset, I was sort of giving my version of it as it pertained to the podcast. And not that my podcast is a big deal, but it's a buckload bigger of a deal than it was 3 years ago had I not started it. So to that end, how about you define imposter syndrome for me and just kind of give us in the lay terms so people can clearly understand it.
Yeah, it's when people feel like an intellectual fraud despite evidence of ongoing success. So it's when a person feels doubtful about their skills, about their accomplishments, or their ability, despite having a track record of actually being able to do that particular task or that particular job. And there's a fear of being exposed as a fraud by an imaginary fraud police.
Mm.
And I mean, that's the initial definition.
So before we get into how you kind of got into this space and your own imposter syndrome, who are you? What do you do? What's your backstory? Why are we here to listen to you teach us about imposter syndrome? What makes you an expert on this, aside from the fact that you wrote a brilliant book on it? Like, what's your journey? How did you get to this point?
My journey started when I wanted to pitch myself as a professional human beatboxer. Would you believe it?
Mm.
And I wanted to go in.
I did not know that, actually.
Yeah. So I could beatbox since I was 14, self-taught, and people told me that I was great at it.
Does everybody know what beatboxing is? Do we have to have a demo?
Demo, absolutely. Demo beatboxing is, first of all, it's creating realistic drum beats with the sound. I hope my mic won't pop, but I'll give you some old school hip hop. Ready?
Go.
Now let's, did that come through all right?
Wow, man, that was crystal clear. That was fantastic. That's going to be the intro for the podcast.
Now I give you a little bit more
it sounded like you had a snare drum in there.
Yeah, the TR-909 drum loop machine by Roland is my favorite drum loop machine, and I try to imitate it. Here's some breakbeat. You ready?
Yeah. That's really cool.
And a range of other sound effects and drum styles and different genres of electronic music, which I love. So I try to copy them as a bit of a hobby during my teenage years. And then eventually I had this idea, maybe I should go into schools and motivate young people to find their unique talent. But I procrastinated because I went through imposter syndrome.
So before we continue down that hole there, are you able to do other impersonations, or is this just confined to beatboxing?
After a drink or two, I'm really good at impersonating a few people, but I wouldn't say that's my forte. Yeah, but I can imitate certain things, but it's not like that's what I aim to do.
All right, so you had this dream of being a beatboxer, and that got delayed because of your own imposter syndrome, as you just put it. Tell me, sorry, how old is this when this is happening? What's your age?
So I was early 20s when I first had the idea of building a workshop and going into schools and doing presentations and teaching young people, A, how to have a bit of fun with beatboxing, and B, to actually define their unique talent and to follow that as a career path. And I was using myself as an example and saying, look, beatboxing is not a skill or a job that you can just apply for. It's totally left of center. And so I thought I'll go out there and put myself out there and be an example of someone who created a business around some unique talent that they were born with.
So the question begs, sorry to interrupt. The question begs,
Yeah.
so what's the industry for beatboxing? Are we talking just like cinema, Hollywood, that sort of stuff? Like, where else would this be played out?
At the moment, I know that there's international competitions. Some people beatbox in albums.
Yeah.
but otherwise, I'm not too sure really if there's an industry for it.
So where were you hoping to go with it at one point? Just because was
Well,
there some?
I was hoping to become a professional speaker and run workshops in schools around my country, which is
Mm,
kind of what I ended up doing for a while.
mm. And then you said
So
imposter syndrome got in the way with that. So tell me about
well,
that.
imposter syndrome got in the way before I even started. So I had the skill and I wanted to go and create a business and start getting bookings for it, but I just procrastinated because I doubted whether I actually had the chops.
So do you feel that your self-doubt around this came from something that happened during your childhood? Like what's the psychology behind that?
Yeah, so I've looked a lot into what I call my void, and this comes a lot from the works of Dr. John D. Martini. So full credit here. So he talks about how our voids drive our value, meaning whatever we perceive as missing in our lives creates a kind of vacuum to head towards it to fulfill it, not only for ourselves but for other people, so they don't have to go through the similar pain. And I look back into my childhood and thought, where is it that I am getting this motivation and this inspiration to go and educate people about using their voice to pursue something that is their passion? And I think it came down to the fact that in school, I was not very smart and in the core subjects. I was quite gifted at the artistics side of things, but that was not really valued in my family. It was do the core subjects like English, mathematics, science, and I sucked at those. And so, as a result of not feeling intelligent and not really feeling like I had an ability to express myself, I got into a line of work that was very much about expressing a unique thing about me and helping others to find that too.
So that's interesting. This void, I'd like to sort of make a parallel with my life if I can but clearly understand that. So a lot of the things that I do in my profession today is helping people find their voice and their brand. And are you saying based upon that theory of this void by this Dr. Martini that when if I start to analyze that for a second, I was one of 12 kids, and there wasn't a lot of praising going around in our family. My dad was very totalitarian, if you will, and that's putting it lightly. And emotions and things like that weren't really accepted in his household. Like you weren't really allowed to cry or like beg for things or be impatient. Like it was we were sort of like robotically trained, right, just to like be really good. So,
Mm.
am I using my void from that lack of appreciation or acknowledgement or even validation, and I'm projecting that into my space now? Is that what did I hear you say?
Well, let's have a look at it. I mean, you just said you didn't receive praise and there was not any opportunity or a lot of opportunity to express emotion. And then if you look at what you do now for other people, you give them praise, I suspect, through a mastermind group, and you raise them up and you allow them to express themselves emotionally. Is that true?
In that regard, but it's a communal effort. But in my business, my branding agency, that's exactly what I do. Huh. I've never thought about it that way before.
And I mean, if you think about being a podcast host, you're probably going to get reviews. That's a kind of praise for
Hmm.
expressing something from the heart, which
Hmm.
is your voice and your all your projects and everything. So we compensate what's missing. We go and look for it and try to fulfill that.
So I understand that part, but what I thought I heard you say is that we do that for others as part of our mission when we didn't have it ourselves. Did I not hear you say
Yeah,
that?
I feel that if we perceive that something is missing, we will try to fulfill it not only for ourselves, but for other people
Hmm. That makes
who
that makes a
might be
lot of
going
sense.
through it as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I've only recently come across the term imposter syndrome in the last few years, and really only when I started doing the type of work that I'm doing, workshops and things of that nature, did I really start to realize that not everybody could do that or were comfortable doing that. Let's rephrase that. And so the sort of this idea of being on social media and showing up on camera and being on a podcast and sort of always being front and center, um, it's imposter syndrome when you have sort of doubts around that. How does that show up in people is it always the same sense of feelings? Like what does that feel like if you had to put some terms and words to it?
Yeah, initially people feel anxiety and stress around putting themselves out there, so to speak. And that can lead to withdrawing into themselves, not asking for help. It can also lead to depression and even giving up and quitting. But essentially, it's anxiety and stress of what's going to happen if I put myself out there and own who I am as an authority.
Um, Tell me if you agree with this. So a lot of times when I encounter people who are having this imposter syndrome, and they're people that I encounter in workshops, or they're in people that I'm working with and helping really promote their brand, right? And they're sort of like, it's no big deal. Like, I don't really have to get up and say something. And, what's the loss if I don't? Like, what's the harm that can be done? And my response to that around the prevalence and the impact of not embracing your imposter syndrome are multiple fold. For starters, your voice, you may have something that you could share with the world that could make a difference, whether it's your insights, it's your intellect, your humor. If there's something that you can provide somebody, even if it's just one person, then it's sort of worth sharing. Because if you, and this is a question, because if you don't do that, I feel like that sort of becomes a stepping stone for other not doing that. Does that make sense?
Say that one time, you just glitched out for a second, that last sentence.
So the other piece, outside from the impact you could make on other people's lives by sharing your version of the world, whatever that is, and social media, never before have we had the opportunity to do that, right? We have a
Yeah.
platform that can reach, what are we, 8 billion people on the planet, technically speaking. Most everybody has a phone. I feel like they have them in their hands at birth now. That's the new transhumanism, phones like literally in the hand. But never before have we, for a relatively low cost of entry, had the opportunity to share our version of the world. And if there's something worth sharing, we sort of have almost a moral obligation to do that. And when people don't do that, my response to them is what I just said. But also, I feel like by not embracing your imposter syndrome or your psychology around it, you're sort of setting a precedent for other things that you might not address as well, because of the same reasons you didn't address imposter syndrome. Does that make sense?
I think so. What's your question?
I would like to know what your thoughts are on the impact of not addressing your imposter syndrome and sort of facing your fears around it. What's the impact of that?
That you won't fulfill your being. If you don't go after the thing that you're most afraid of and face it, you will never experience your gift, and you'll never be able to fulfill, let us say, your destiny, if you want a nice creative word. The thing that people are most afraid of is usually the thing that is in front of their gift or talent.
Mm-hmm.
And there's usually some moral minimizing of yourself. You're basically subordinating yourself to some other individual, either consciously or unconsciously. And you are saying to yourself, in comparison to that person, I'm not allowed to express myself fully, or I require their permission, or I'll never be as good as this person, or the thing that I want to express myself in is not of worth, because through the eyes of that person that you are subordinating to, there's a values conflict. Their values are more important than yours.
Understood. I like that. So going back to the story you started to share before we kind of got off topic, how did you decide to address your own imposter syndrome so that you could step forward into this own power? What was it you tried to do early in the days? Or what was it you accomplished?
Two main things. Number one, I just started making sales calls to school principals. I made like 100 in one day. And, I'm shaking on the phone, calling school principals and saying, will you book me? I just thought I'll just face the fire and see if I can desensitize myself to the nerves of putting myself out there. And
it's not often that a grown man calls 100 elementary schools and wants to know if he can come talk to the kids.
Well, it was primary schools and high schools.
In
It was
today's day
also
and age, I don't know if you could get away with that anymore.
no. I mean, they knew I was legitimate. I was like, I love working with young people. I've worked with kids all my life in entertainment roles and things like that. But when I put myself out there specifically with my name on it, then there was the nerves.
Sure.
I mean, I had plenty of references from other people that had booked me, um, or I had entertained their people before, but now this was my own business. So it felt like there was more skin in the game, or there was more on the line. Anyway, so I called all these schools, and I called organizers and said, book me. And eventually the 100th call said yes. And I was like, whoa, shit, you're gonna pay me to do something that I have my heart involved in. And so that helped overcome that initial part. But then even when I was entertaining people and I was in stage, I felt the nervousness or the butterflies, as you were talking about in the intro. And I wanted to get past that to a genuine feeling of confidence about what I was doing. And so I realized that I was being narcissistic and making it all about me. Like, I want to feel confident and all this. And then I realized, no, focus on the audience and serve. And I've really got this value of service to other people as something that is like medicine. If you serve other people and you come from that place, you can forget yourself, or you can make mistakes. And that's actually human to come from that point of view. So that was the second thing. In addition, I'll throw in a third thing. I joined a public speaking organization to practice public speaking, to try and get over the nervousness feelings. That kind of worked, but it didn't really get me to the point where I was totally confident and certain within myself to put myself into a new situation. And I'm going to come back to the value of serving people as the sort of medicine that really got me over the line of do this for the audience. And then imposter syndrome and self-doubt dissolved.
You talked a little bit about it in your book, and as by the way, if you haven't picked up his book, it's called How to Beat Imposter Syndrome and Be Confident. You talked about the 5 different types of imposters that you've labeled: the perfectionist, the expert, the natural genius. Let's see if I can remember them: the soloist, and the superhero. Where are these your terms? Or
These are not my terms.
Okay.
This is somebody else's that I would have paraphrased. I've since realized that those are nice categories, but you really only talk about those in order to help people to sort of connect to it. Like, how's this affecting me in my life?
Well,
But
stop
I'm
there.
gonna,
Stop there for
yeah,
a second. Tell me. Let's just use those terms since I dropped them. How do
yeah.
those? Can you sort of identify what each one is, and how it sort of embodies itself, or how it delivers itself in that person's life? So the perfectionist. Give me an example of someone who
Yeah,
has imposter syndrome.
the perfectionists will either start a project and they won't complete it unless they know for sure that it will be perfect.
Mm,
So that's one way. The second way is I'm not going to start at all, because if it's not perfect from the get-go, then I'm a failure.
mm. The expert. What about the expert?
I've got to come across like I know everything all of the time. I can't be wrong. I have a genuine fear of being corrected by my audience or my students.
And then the natural genius.
So natural genius is a bit like the expert. I kind of think that if you've been doing something for a long time and you're really good at it, that you may have peaked, and you want to keep going up. You don't want to just I know that what's a LJK Rowling, when she wrote Harry Potter, right?
Mm-hmm.
She said, she's actually got a TED talk on it, where she said, people ask me, aren't you afraid now that you've written this great book that you'll never be as successful again? So that's, I think, the natural genius is like, if I don't want to peak too early, because I might not be as successful again and again. I might not be able to come through the goods again and again.
And then there was the soloist. How does that manifest
The
itself?
soloist is I'm going to do all of this by myself and prove something to the world, and I'm not going to ask for help.
And the superhero?
Fix everything. I'm going to fix everything by myself. It's kind of like connected to the soloist.
So all of those examples define for me how that makes them an imposter. So I understand their reasoning behind it, but how does that make them an imposter?
Well, if they don't fulfill the role,
Mm-hmm.
they feel that they are. Well, I think there's also this feeling that they have to fulfill that role. They must always be perfect. They must
Mm-hmm.
always be the natural genius. They must always be the soloist. And if they are not, they're not good enough, and people will find them out.
Mm-hmm. And so
So that,
are they imposters for identifying as the perfectionist, or do they not even know they identify as a perfectionist?
oh, they are fully aware that they identify as these things. And if they don't fulfill the role continuously, then they will be discovered as a fraud,
Understood.
whether that's an intellectual fraud, creative fraud, entrepreneurial fraud, parent fraud.
So you've talked a lot about in your journey and in the book strategies to overcome imposter syndrome. You've talked a little bit about accepting compliments, for example. That's something that I used to have a difficult time, and I after doing some of the work around it, I realized that I never received many compliments as a kid from my parents. And so when I do get when I was getting compliments from people, I would be almost like embarrassed, like, oh, I don't deserve that. Oh, stop, that sort of stuff, like embarrassment. So what are some of the ways that people can overcome these things?
The number one thing I'm going to recommend to everybody, first of all, is to clarify their highest values in life. And that's usually top top one, two, three things, concepts, or activities that are most inspiring to them, and areas of their life where they don't require discipline, they don't require outside motivation, they're most reliable, and they don't require reminders to do it. Those activities or those concepts that inspire you will indicate your highest values. That's the step number one.
Do you have an
The
exercise for that?
Yeah, so Dr. DeMartini would
Uh-huh.
you can use his website, and he's got the DeMartini determination values determination exercise where he lists a bunch of questions, which is how do you fill your space, how do you fill your time, what conversation topics do you like to have, how do you spend your money, and all of these things are going to indicate what is most valuable to you. For me, it's education. I love teaching and I love learning.
Hmm. All right.
Put
So
me in a room. Put me in a room with people. I love it.
yeah, I'm the same. I don't know that education is one of my core three, but it's definitely in the top. All right. So what are some other ways?
So let's say someone gets a compliment or some praise. The initial response would be, "I'm not worth the compliment," or they feel embarrassed by it. Okay, that's where people can't take it. So what I recommend people to do is to say, "How does this compliment help me to fulfill my highest values?" And then start listing reasons of how this person is actually complimenting you, is trying to help you to fulfill your highest values. So you, rather than judge yourself in comparison to somebody else, you are comparing yourself with your highest values and saying, okay, how is this compliment going to actually help me fulfill that?
When I hear you say some of these things, especially the ways to improve or to overcome your imposter syndrome, it really sounds like you're asking people to step into a mindset, a growth mindset, sort of like
Absolutely.
always improving upon yourself. Can you sort of speak to that a little bit? Just kind of talk why that piece of it is sort of akin and why it's so important.
Yeah, so many people compare themselves unrealistically to other people, and as a
Yeah.
result, they procrastinate and they minimize themselves. So I would recommend people to stop doing that and start comparing yourself to or start comparing your daily actions to your list of values, your hierarchy of values, and say, did I do some little task today that helped me to fulfill that value or not? If you do, your self-worth will go up. If you can complete a task that you can say, yep, Doing that little task is actually helping me to fulfill my highest values. Your self-worth goes up. You're not comparing yourself to anybody else.
In this space, in this process of developing this growth mindset and not comparing people, it sounds to me, and I'm speaking from my own experience around this, is that by starting to do the little things and being very habitual and mindful about it, whether it is focusing on this value list, in my case, I always make a list in the morning of 3 things that I need to accomplish that day and 3 things that I've been sort of putting off on the back burner. And at the end of the night, I review those 6 items and I sort of check off which of them were addressed and which were not. And it's funny that you said that the things that we often avoid the most are the ones that we need the most, right? So I'll notice that some of the things that I'm avoiding are the ones that I really need to do the most because they're going to have the most impact, but they're also going to be the biggest pain in the ass to accomplish sometimes. So, but the thing that I notice, sorry, I'm going somewhere. The thing that I notice is that over time, the more habitual I was about something and the more mindful I was about focusing on that actual habit, the more confidence that I gained in a variety of other ways, including showing up on camera and not having any butterflies from it. So confidence, and then I gleaned that from your book as well, has a huge factor in that. What are some other ways that people who are suffering from imposter syndrome can build their confidence, their self-confidence?
Well, I'm going to recommend the DeMartini method here. And this is something that I was recently trained in, did the DeMartini values training back in August last year. And this was this was after the book. So the book doesn't have too much information about this new mindset and method that I'm now using. The DeMartini method, the aim of it is to neutralize emotional charges and bring about a mindset of clarity and gratitude and certainty. And the way you do that, first of all, is you get clear on the person's highest values, top 3. And then you ask the person, what is the highest priority specific trait, action, or inaction that you perceive yourself or somebody else displaying or demonstrating that you despise or dislike most? And you get really clear on where the emotional charge is, because that's going to hint for where the subordination is going on. Are you subordinating yourself in comparison to a specific individual or to yourself? And what specifically is it? What trait, action, or inaction? And from there, you can start to balance that perception and neutralize the emotional charge.
So in building confidence, there's another piece that I uncovered and I saw it in your book, and I really wanted to touch on that as well. And it centers around the idea of vulnerability and embracing sort of your things that don't necessarily work so well. And in today's social media, I noticed early on that people were sort of like promoting themselves and how great and grandeur they were, but then there became this trend of like openly expressing the vulnerabilities, and that seems to resonate with people more. But what I found by being honest and transparent about some of the things that you struggle with the most, you're humanizing yourself and sort of, how do I say this? It's almost like you're setting up yourself for it to be okay if you continue to fail. Do you see it that way? And if so, do you sort of feel that might be a conflict in some ways?
I feel that if people are vulnerable or they can admit that they're wrong, then yes, it's an endearing quality and it helps people to connect. In fact, I was looking at the Disney Pixar as a slide deck that tells you how to write a story. One of the key things in there is we love a character more for their flaws than for what they are good at. We can connect with that rather than someone who's big noting them all the time, big noting themselves all the time and saying, look how great I am. Other humans prefer someone who tries something, fails, but keeps going to try it. We respect that and we start to cheer for the underdogs, so to speak. We say, no, we want that person to be successful because they don't give up despite the flaw.
And
so
I think,
if you,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go.
And I think a lot of people look at it the other way when they first think about their vulnerabilities. They see it more as, oh, it's going to be so embarrassing to share this, or they're going to think even worse of me than they already do, type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. People will think I'm going to be ridiculed.
Hmm.
This is what I used to think, is that if I put myself out there and make a mistake and be vulnerable, that people are going to ridicule me and I'll be laughed off stage. And I actually found that the exact opposite would occur when I put myself out there. I would mention the vulnerability, and that actually brought people together in the audience because it started a conversation, because most people feel some sense of vulnerability or some sense of fear around expressing who they are. So when I started to make it a conversation point in my workshops, it it made me feel very comfortable, for starters. So I was like, okay, great, I'm having a really authentic conversation here about something important with people, and it allowed them to express themselves too. It's strange, if you talk about the most scariest thing, it can often lead to a great conversation.
Yeah, and I think that just the opposite of that is true, because I've noticed that on social media alone, anytime I can post a fabulous video or a fabulous photograph, and you'll have a few people that will respond to it. But anytime I put a story out there about something that I was struggling with and overcame, or talked about a transparent issue that I was struggling with and needed some input or advice, it's like everybody clings to that, because strength in numbers, right? People like to sort of see, hey, I'm not the only one alone here. There's somebody else that's
Yeah,
suffering from that,
I've
right?
done the same thing.
Yeah. So how can you use that to your advantage most effectively? How can you use
Use
vulnerability?
vulnerability.
Yeah, how can you use vulnerability most effectively to your advantage? Like, what does it do when you sort of embrace that?
Well, I think it opens up a kind of a world of enchantment, like Joseph Campbell is talking about. If you can go up to your vulnerability, you go into a kind of a new world or a new mindset where you have this beautiful gift of being able to reassess everything you know about the world and yourself, and you think, oh, I used to be scared of that, and now my eyes are wider, and I'm realizing I didn't really have anything to be afraid of. And then you go, okay, so what's the next task? What's the
Mhm.
next most scary thing? Now I feel like I can take it on. And so
Mm,
you begin to prepare yourself for even more greater challenges.
mm. You mentioned earlier in the show, because when I was listing the 5 categories, that you weren't happy with that labeling of them anymore. So we didn't get a chance to clarify that. What happened with those 5? You changed them, or the phenomena changed?
Well, since I did the DeMartini training, I realized that labels are not the most effective way to, or effective avenue to help an individual to neutralize the emotion that they're going through, and the minimizing of themselves in comparison to someone else. You just don't need to do it. It's
Yeah,
like
my
go straight to the thing that you feel emotionally charged about and the individual.
mhm,
It's like forget trying to categorize it. Let's go straight to what your intuition tells me or tells you. Where is the emotional charge? Who is it around? What specifically is it that they do? And then from that point there, when you bring up a memory of that person, of them demonstrating a specific thing, you might say, oh, it's this person. I always think of this person whenever I'm going to do something. I see this person, think, oh, that person's perfect, or this person's, a genius, and I could never be like that. Go to those specific moments and then try to find where you demonstrate the same trait or action in your own life, in another area of your life that you are minimizing and not valuing. And then you'll start to see, actually, I do the same trait and action as the person that I'm infatuating with, just in another area of my life that I'm not valuing.
mm.
And you'll start to see them eye to eye rather than putting them on a pedestal.
Or labeling them. I sort of thought the labeling was a bit oversimplification of the imposter syndrome concept, because not everybody, I can't imagine that everybody suffers for the exact same reasons. And I sort of felt
No,
like Yeah, so I sort of
They're
felt
they're,
like
they're good categories. It makes
uh-huh.
for a good way to explain it to people. However, at the end of the day, it's going to be a very specific thing for every single person. Who is the individual, and what is the specific thing that you are, that is causing the judgment or the self judgment, which
Mhm,
in turn minimizes your worth.
mhm. In terms of addressing your imposter syndrome, do you feel like that's a one size fits all strategy in the sense that everybody has different cultural backgrounds, personal histories, individual differences, traumas, whatever that can influence how they experience imposter syndrome. So by just sort of saying there's a one size fit all strategy, is that limiting, or do you not feel like it's a one size fit all strategy and over to overcome it?
I'm certain that the DeMartini method has application in thousands and thousands of areas with people, and this has been proved not only by me. I've had now 150 hours client-facing time with people in 9 countries from various backgrounds. There's also about 5,000 other people in the world trained in this method, and DeMartini himself has assisted thousands of people with this method, and it doesn't matter where they come from, what they look like, anything.
Brilliant. And you can read about that in the book. So, if you had, in your own words, a simplification of this, what are 3 to 5 takeaways that you could leave people with today that are listening to the show that might be having some doubts around who they are, or what they can accomplish, or whether they should show up, or whether they should start that podcast? What are 3 to 5 things that you would tell them they could do right now to start getting that under control?
The first and most important thing is to clarify your highest values. Absolutely. Get super clear on what is most important and most inspiring to you, whether they are concepts or activities. Get really clear on what you value. And be careful here that you're not just making a list based on what you think you should value or what you think others want from you. That's the problem there. The second thing is to go, okay, what's my vision for my life? What am I inspired to do? Because when you get inspired and you have a clear vision, blood and glucose and oxygen goes from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex. This creates a coating around the neurons called myelination, which basically means electrical signals travel faster through the brain. You have more strategy, more planning, more ability to see objectively, rather being a prey to flight or fight
Mm,
responses in the amygdala. And that is a result of being focused on your vision and what is most inspiring to you. So the brain is a fulfillment seeking organism. That's the second thing you can do. Then you get down to the nitty gritty. You say, okay, what specific daily actions can I do? Just like you said before, 3 things, one thing that I can do each day to help fulfill my highest values. And then at the end of the day, you say, okay, what worked? What didn't work? Did I
mhm.
do things today that helped me fulfill my highest values? That's what people can do.
That's great tips. All right, so you're on a circuit now of doing workshops around this as well, and so tell me a little bit about what you're up to today, what you're doing.
At the moment, I'm putting together a workshop in Sydney, Australia, for professional speakers to build their brand and also to improve their self worth. So that's coming up in August. And that's a collaboration with a good friend of mine, Zarina Robertson.
Mhm.
And in addition to that, I am starting to put myself out there to organizations as a professional speaker to talk about imposter syndrome.
And doing podcasts.
Doing podcasts, coaching people, got another book in the pipeline, geeking
That's
out in Chat GPT.
Man, I was just having a conversation on ChatGPT today with somebody on my team. It's crazy. He was showing me these plugins. It's a bit scary. I'm not going to lie. It's a whole new podcast. I think I need to bring somebody on and have some ChatGPT conversations. There's
Yeah.
goods and bads to it. I've tried to pragmatically analyze that and sort of see the good and bad. And anyhow, that's a different conversation. All right, how can people find you? What's the best social media outlet for them to hit you up?
Yeah. Selfworthsam.com or my handle, my username on all social media is just Self-Worth Sam.
Brilliant.
And you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook.
Sam, I appreciate you taking the time, and thank you for sharing this book with me. I got a lot of nuggets out of it. It was a good read. If anybody else wants to pick up Sam's book and discover new levels of authenticity and confidence in your life, and it applies on a variety of levels, the name of the book is How to Beat Imposter Syndrome and Be Confident. And inside, he's got all sorts of exercises and an online course, and you even have a 30-day challenge. What's the 30-day challenge? Tell us about that.
So the book was originally a video course of about 4 hours, which is chopped up into 30 chapters. That was the video course. Then I just uploaded the videos to YouTube. YouTube transcribed all the audio, and I copied and pasted that and made that book.
That's pretty ingenious.
So I didn't write the book; I spoke it.
Well done. Well done. All right, Sam. Hey, man, I appreciate your time. It's been great having you as a guest. Thanks for joining A Little Impolite, and we'll stay in touch. But all the best to you and all the things you have going on.
Thank you so much, Devo, and more power to you and your audience.
Thank you, and thanks for joining us so early, man. Well done.
You're welcome. A pleasure.
See you around soon, brother. So thank you for joining us today on an episode of Little Impolite. That was an interesting conversation around a topic that I think has a lot of bearing on a lot of people's lives, and call it what you will, insecurity, fear. It all boils down to sort of this whole idea of why me, and why would anyone want to listen to me, and those are just sort of getting you in the way of the things that you really want to do. I can speak firsthand on the impact of addressing those fears and just sort of kind of stepping into my own power, if you will. So that was an eye-opening conversation with Self-Worth Sam. I hope you've gained some valuable insights into imposter syndrome and self-confidence and the diverse perspectives that surround these topics. I think there's a lot of different ways that you can approach it. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to the show today. I know you have choices in the bazillion different podcasts that are out there. If you like the show, you can comment on it below in the comment screen. Don't forget to leave us a review if you enjoy this episode. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast. And your feedback, your reviews helps us grow and continue to bring amazing guests like Sam for these thought-provoking conversations and the A Little Impolite version that we take on them. So if you're curious in learning more about past shows, you can find us on YouTube, like I said, iTunes, Spotify, and on my website, which is fusioncontentbranding.com. So I appreciate your time and your interest, and I look forward to seeing you in a week from now. Thank you.